Good evening and welcome to a special edition of Michigan Farm Bureau's virtual Hitching Post as we discuss a variety of topics related to COVID-19. While it seems like an eternity ago on January 31st, a national public health emergency was declared for coronavirus, also referred to as COVID-19. This action would set in motion a chain of events that required a national heightened and rapid response. Tonight, we'll explore how the pandemic has affected the agricultural supply chain and discuss the federal and state response. Good evening. My name is Matt Smego, and I serve as the Director of the Public Policy and Commodity Division for Michigan Farm Bureau. Joining me this evening is Ernie Birchmeier, Manager of our Center for Commodities, Farming, and Industry Relations, John Kran, our National Legislative Counsel, and Rob Anderson, Manager of our Government Relations Department. Our goal for the Hitching Post is to bring MFB staff and industry professionals into your homes and really for about 30 to 40 minutes to allow you to hear what's going on firsthand with policy, commodities, markets, and more. We hope as you listen in tonight that if you do have a question, please feel free to submit in the Q&A box on your screen, and we'll do our best to try to incorporate that into the discussion. Also would like to remind everyone that we are recording tonight's discussion videocast. So if you'd like to go back and re-listen to the discussion, you'll have the ability to do that or share this with your friends that weren't able to join us tonight. Those links will be available this coming Thursday on both the Michigan Farm Bureau Facebook page as well as shown on our Michigan Farm Bureau YouTube page. So with that, let's get started. First, we're going to turn to Ernie Birchmeier and ask Ernie to cover for us a little bit of the background of the impacts related to our supply chain, which has been very efficient, almost too efficient, some would say, as it relates to impacts from COVID-19 as well as the markets. Ernie?
Good evening, Matt, and welcome everyone. It's great to be with you. Matt, it's nice that we could all color coordinate our shirts this evening. So we were bringing forth a united effort, if not in our message, at least in our clothing attire this evening. So I look forward to the conversation. You know, back in March, the middle of March, it was kind of an exciting time. You know, high school basketball teams were getting ready to start the playoffs. Sparty had just tied for a Big Ten championship in basketball, and we're getting ready to tip off the Big Ten tournament and on their way to another national title. High school sports were getting geared up. At Farm Bureau, we had just finished off a pretty exciting AFBF annual meeting. We had worked on the USMCA and trade. The China deal had been finalized, and we were looking forward to a great year for agriculture. And then COVID-19 hit, and the train kind of ran off the tracks. And I think it's important to set a little bit of framework from where we were at that time. You know, at that time, 51% of the meals were consumed outside of the household. And boy, did that change in a hurry. And that led to some market disruption. When you take 51% of the meals and then force nearly 100% of the meals to be consumed inside the household and all of that food being purchased at the retail grocery store level, that will cause some changes and some market disruption. And we saw that. Because of that, then we saw some immediate impacts to prices. We saw prices decline over time in the dairy industry by about 50%, in the pork industry by about 50%. In the beef industry, prices declined by about 35%, similar in the sheep industry. And we had price fluctuations and disruptions in the egg and poultry industry as well. You take eggs in particular, and the number of liquid eggs that are used in baking and food service establishments across the countryside, and that the use of that product then going away, and then virtually to all shell eggs, you saw a dramatic increase short term in the price of shell eggs, those purchased at the grocery store, versus liquid eggs that were utilized in a lot of those baking and food establishments. We saw sharp changes in the dairy industry when it came to the consumption and utilization of cheese. When you think about all of the cheese that is consumed at restaurants, food establishments, whether it be in high schools or universities, even sporting events, and the volume of food product that's used there, we saw a dramatic decrease in there. And with that, then sharp declines in the value of cheese and class 3 prices of milk, while at the same time, the demand for fluid milk that being purchased at the grocery store, in a gallon jug changed pretty dramatically. And we saw shortages in some of those supplies, at grocery store shelves for the first time, really, in most of our lives. We had never seen anything or experienced anything like that. We had developed a just-in-time food system in this country where the product that was being produced at the farm was going through the processor to the retailer, whether that was in food establishments or restaurants or the retail grocery store shelf. And that product did not sit in warehouses very long. And we were moving it through the industry in a rather efficient and rapid process. And all of that changed, as did the demand level of where people were purchasing their product from. So we saw some dramatic changes there as well. Our nursery and greenhouse center saw dramatic changes, and I know Rob will talk about some of the executive orders and how it impacted those facilities. But our friends in the fruit and vegetable and the specialty crops industry certainly saw some market disruption there, as they did not have the ability to move some of those bedding plants in the manner in which they wanted. Eventually, we were able to get a lot of that ironed out, and thanks to a lot of work by our members across the state for making some contacts to our elected officials in regards to those. But nonetheless, we saw market disruption there as well. Our U-pick operations were in limbo for a while, and as the weather warmed up and the plants and that produce started to mature a bit, we were able to get things ironed out there as well. But there was market disruption and concern in that industry as well. Since that time, we've seen some prices rebound, particularly on the meat side of things and in the dairy industry. The last few weeks, Class 3 prices for milk have increased dramatically. We're hoping that those Class 3 prices will be reflective in the prices paid to our dairy farmers here very soon. But remember, the price that our farmers are paid for is not completely dependent just upon that Class 3 price. There are other factors that come into play there as well. We need to go back and touch on the processing capabilities for just a bit. We did see, because of COVID-19 and illnesses, we did see our packing and processing industry impacted dramatically. And there were times when we had about 50% of our processing capacity, both in pork and pork and beef in this country, that was shut down due to COVID-19 illness. And when that happens, obviously there's an impact at the farm level and the retail level. At the farm level, our farmers were continuing to grow and produce that livestock on a daily basis and have to care for it. But when there's nowhere for those animals to go, just because there's not the availability of shackle space around the Midwest and around the country, that causes a backup on the farm, and that causes some real concerns. Those delays in most of those plants were shut down, at least partial shutdowns for some of them, 2 to 3 weeks before they were back up and operational. And then it took some time to get them back to the new normal from a functioning standpoint, because social distancing measures have had to have been put in place in those processing plants that call for more distancing between workers, for more protection equipment to be used. And we probably will never get back to 100% capacity as we once knew it in those processing plants. But we are getting back to what's considered the new near normal, and things are processing and flowing fairly well again. But we will continue to see some off and on shutdowns just due to worker illness that we're all concerned about. And that's utmost, first and foremost, of the utmost importance to everyone. We need a great food supply like we have. And during many media interviews, we talked about the food supply we have in this country, and that our farmers are continuing to farm on a daily basis prior to COVID-19, just like they'll do after COVID-19. But we want to make sure that we have a safe workforce out there that is healthy, and an affordable, safe, healthy food supply for our consumers. So that's an awful lot in a couple of minutes. That'll probably cause a few questions to be asked. And there may have even been some things that I have forgotten, but we'll look forward to the discussion. I will end with my portion of the comments with, as a Farm Bureau organization, as farmers listening in, we need to think about a couple of areas of concern, and where do we go from a policy standpoint when it comes to our food industry? Do we need to take a look at food consolidation and production and processing consolidation? Has our processing end become too consolidated? Did that cause some of those shutdowns and concerns? There's been lots of discussion about the need for more small processing plants. If that's the case, then how do we make those functional, make them profitable, and make them work for the industry if that's what our consumers are desiring and that's what our members are desiring? How do we build a system that continues to meet the needs of everyone, fully realizing we've got a large percentage of our population that will still consume and buy from the large grocery store retail level? So there are many policy discussions and issues and topics that will come out of this as we continue to work through COVID-19.
Ernie, you brought up an interesting point, and that is as much of the country was dealing with stay-at-home orders in order to flatten the curve. We've been told repeatedly we need to flatten the curve to minimize the spread from overwhelming our healthcare system. One of the things for agriculture, unique to many other businesses that you made comment on, is you can't stop something once it starts growing. So if a plant or an animal is in production cycles, we don't have the ability just to put things on pause. Many other businesses had that luxury. We don't have that luxury in agriculture. And so trying to manage through that in a way that we can continue to operate. It was important that agriculture be deemed as one of the essential industries, which has gotten a lot of banter about of what is essential, what's not essential. Let's get rid of that terminology altogether. But it was critical for us to be able to continue operating, even to the extent of providing for the systems that we did have functioning. One of the things I wanted to bring to our viewers tonight is letting them know some of the resources that are available to agricultural employers that have both continued to operate during the pandemic. I know that Michigan Farm Bureau worked with Michigan State University and others to prepare some employer guidance. That can be found on our Michigan Farm Bureau website. If you go to mishfb.com /coronavirus, we have a whole page dedicated to this discussion. So if you'd like to dig into more resources related to COVID-19, you'll find more there. But any comments, Ernie, as far as some of the additional measures that either agricultural employers, processors have been doing? As you mentioned, employees, family members, their safety and protection is at the utmost of everyone's mind. So what are some of the things that we have been seeing happening out in the countryside to help protect our employees and our families?
Sure. Our farmers have done an outstanding job, and then the processors that go with them, implementing, personal protection equipment on those operations, whether they're, on fruit and vegetable operations, in the U-Pick and the nursery and garden center industries, and making sure their employees are protected safely. So making sure we have masks available, checking temperatures when those workers get there on a daily basis, making sure from a transportation standpoint that we're not putting too many of those workers in the same vehicle, and making sure that we're taking safety precautions there as well. From the plant side, again, we talked about it, whether it's a meat processing facility or a vegetable packing operation or a flour packing operation, making sure that our workers are spread out, that there's social distancing, keeping face masks on, checking temperatures. We're even following the executive orders that obviously that Rob will talk about in terms of migrant and seasonal workers, and making sure that there are not too many of those workers in one lodging establishment, during the evening hours, and making sure our folks are spread out. Again, it is critical that we make sure that worker safety is of utmost priority, and that's always been an issue for agriculture, whether we're dealing with COVID-19 or not. So we have been very diligent in working with the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, working with our other partners in state government to make sure that the information that is put out there we're sharing with our members, but then also getting the equipment and making it available to our members, whether it be hand sanitizers, face masks, thermometers, and keeping that information in front of our members. This is one of those times when information is always valuable, but having the correct and accurate information of where to go with real hardcore answers and solutions of products to buy and where you can get it, and making sure it's available, that was even more critical at this time. And then making sure, as we do every day in agriculture, of protecting our farms from a biosecurity standpoint, implementing those measures was even more important at this particular time. I want to touch on real quick the processing issue just one more time. We were very fortunate in Michigan from a livestock and dairy industry processing standpoint, and that other states saw some animals being euthanized. Other states saw some milk being dumped. We were very fortunate in Michigan that even though in some instances livestock had to be held on those farms longer and it cost farmers more money, we did not see the issues that some other states had because of the great collaboration and marketing abilities that our farmers had with their processors, and then trying to work through it, even though there were times it was painful. So we've got to keep our farms operating. We've got to keep our workers protected. We've got to keep the supply chain moving, and we've got to continue to supply the wholesome, abundant, safe, affordable food to our consumers. And we did it, and we're continuing to do it as we work through this pandemic.
Thank you, Ernie. Just as a reminder for everyone, again, that's listening, if you'd like to ask questions of our panelists, if you click on the three little dots on your screen, that gives you a more options option here. And then if you click on the Q&A, that'll get you to the question and answer dialog box so we can get your questions. Next, we're going to turn to John Kran, our National Legislative Counsel. And John, we've had some different responses that we've seen from the federal government as relates to coronavirus, and some that more directly impact agriculture, and a lot of things that we've seen for the first time. So for our viewers tonight, maybe highlight a few of those items that we've seen implemented and how those are progressing.
Sure. Thank you, Matt. I thought Ernie did a nice job of kind of laying the groundwork of what we went through, kind of recapping how we got to where we are today. And if you look specifically at how the federal government can respond, there's really a few options that they have. And, typically as a whole, I'd say we look to the federal government for a variety of things, including altering the tax code, changing the regulatory framework we operate under, and then potentially infusing more money into the economy. And really, we looked at those three things. I think the biggest being infusing money into the economy. And while we have a really good system in place, we fought hard to get a farm bill and disaster programs, crop insurance in place over the years. Those programs really aren't designed to respond quickly like we needed in this particular instance, where we had this severe market disruption and really chaos in our workplace and so forth. So the really, if you look specifically at the stimulus piece, Congress responded a couple of different times, but really with a couple of main focuses. One is, how do we get money to farmers that have suffered a loss because their commodity had to sell for a lower price, or maybe had to be dumped or plowed under? How do we buy some of those products so that they don't have to be dumped or plowed under, and provide them to people in need? And also, how can we provide money to those businesses, those employers, through some other tools, in this case, the Small Business Administration, to give people money to operate in the short run. So those are some of the things we looked at. We did also look at the regulatory framework. We had some instances where really it being in uncharted territory. What do we do when the border closes to workers coming in, H-2A workers coming in, for example? What if the consulate's closed? How do we handle those in-person interviews needed for those visa workers? How do we do that virtually, or how do we do that in a way that waives that for people that have been here before? Looking at trucking weight standards, hours of service, things like that. How can we extend those times or take those rules away temporarily, so that product can get to market more quickly and more efficiently? So those are some of the buckets we looked at. And so really, I think the big ones, kind of summarizing that, is the CARES Act, which specifically is today still putting money in farmers' hands for commodities that suffered a market loss. For example, if you were planning on marketing a product in 2019 product in 2020, and the market crashed, you took a lower price for that or couldn't sell it, there's a potential payment available for you as a farmer. And the food box program today. Today we had Secretary Perdue packing boxes with President Bednarski, food boxes, and these, what they're doing is they're taking Michigan products, in this case, milk, fruits and vegetables, other things, and putting them together and quickly distributing to the channels we have in place already to people in need. And that's hopefully buying up surplus commodities on the marketplace as well. And then the third piece is that financial assistance in terms of loans. So the Small Business Administration had really two options for farmers: the economic injury disaster loans and the Paycheck Protection Program, which if you check all the boxes is a forgivable loan. So helping people meet payroll and pay some of those rents and other expenses in the short run to get through this time. There's also the USDA Rural Development Business and Industry Loan option that some people may have used as well. So we talked about stimulus money, we talked about regulatory, we talked a little bit about taxes. We didn't do as much with taxes this time around just because how quickly things needed to happen. That's really the reason too why we didn't solely rely on Farm Bill and crop insurance in this instance, just because it didn't necessarily apply and couldn't deliver the money quickly enough to where it was needed. So that's kind of the snapshot of the federal side, and I'm sure there's some questions, Matt.
Yeah, we're still working on those coming in, so just remind everyone again, if you've got questions for the group, make sure you tap on those three dots and enter those into the Q&A section. John, as you were talking about different programs through the federal government, you highlighted the food box program that was we talked about today. And if you haven't seen your eFarm news yet, you'll see some features there with the Secretary's visit today. One of the things that was highlighted was with COVID-19, and Ernie talked about this a little bit, the disruption in how people get their food. And they talked about everyone from young school-age children to the more aging populations. And one of the things that was interesting today to hear some of the folks that were distributing those food boxes were talking about the need for an increased need for Meals on Wheels, because elderly populations being shut in due to COVID-19 and stay-at-home orders, not being able to get out and get their food. So that demand has increased substantially. Do you see programs like this having a longer duration if the pandemic extends in time frame? Is there discussions about that? Or is this kind of an injection shot in the arm to help things in the short term?
I think some of both, Matt. Good question. It definitely helps in the short term, and this program's going to extend several months in order to keep that food flowing to people as they transition back to the workforce. Maybe their folks are working in the restaurant sector or something else where they haven't been able to work. And Congress continues to talk about the next round of CARES funding, CARES 2.0, and what that could look like. I think there's really two approaches in Congress right now. One is to do something quickly, and the other is to maybe wait and see how the money's working on the ground, that the money all gets allocated properly and can help where needed. The kind of the wait and see approach, but obviously there's some challenges by waiting too long as well. So we as an organization have sent a laundry list, a long list to Congress asking for a variety of things, including making H-2A workers qualify for your Paycheck Protection Program relief, for example, additional help for those commodities that may not have had a crop to market when the COVID hit, but do now today. And so those are some things we're looking at. But I would expect that if things don't get better before too long, Congress will be forced to act again. It might not be $2 or $3 trillion like last time, but that's going to not only help farmers likely, but also needy individuals with the food box type programs again as well. So who knows, maybe even more Small Business Administration money because of how popular that program has been. But
Thanks,
a lot of
John.
unknowns at this point.
Thank you, John. We're going to turn now to Rob Anderson and get some perspectives. Obviously, there's been some coordination between the federal and the state, and we want to see, what kind of, it seems like a lot of that perspective is being driven by the states. And we've seen that here in Michigan. Obviously, Governor Whitmer has taken an aggressive approach listening to health officials as it relates to this public health pandemic. And we've seen a lot of different strategies, even among the different regions of the country. So, Rob, if you could highlight for our viewers tonight some of the things that we've seen here through some of the executive orders. Obviously, Governor Whitmer has put in place a Michigan Restart Plan. and how we can restart and reopen the state's economy. You want to highlight some of those things, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Matt. And this has sort of been our lives over the last few months. I think being on video chats with these three individuals, there's just been so many changes, so many new nuances and updated regulations that we've had to go through just to try to stay on top of where the requirements are for our members so that we can communicate those out effectively. So it's been a lot of this kind of conversation as we've gone along. I think Ernie set it up very well when he kind of took us back to March 10th. You know, that was sort of the beginning of everything. The executive orders that the governor had issued between the 1st of January and March 10th, there were three. One of them, she renamed a department. She actually did another department reorganization, and one that I can't remember. So three executive orders from January 1 to March 10. Since March 10th, we have had 137 executive orders that have related to the COVID-19 emergency. This began with her declaration of an emergency. One of the questions that I get frequently is, what is the governor's authority to do what she's doing? And the governor initially cited two sections of law that give her authority to issue a declaration of emergency. And then also beyond that, issue executive orders that have the force of law under her authority without a legislative approval. So we have been operating under one of those two laws, the 1945 law, which really doesn't provide any end date. She doesn't have sort of, we call it a shot clock on how long she has to continue to issue these executive orders under that law. The legislature actually challenged that in court, and so far they have not proven successful. So that's where we are. We're in a situation where the governor is acting under her authority under a 1945 law to issue executive orders because she's declared this COVID-19 pandemic a state of emergency. So I mentioned we have 137 executive orders related to COVID-19. They're not all in effect at this point because many of them have been updates where she's added new information or extensions or whatever. We have 53 active executive orders in the state right now. Many of those do have a direct impact on agriculture. Many of them have an indirect impact, mostly in the area of how we make sure that we have a safe workplace for our employees. So one of the most recent executive orders that she issued was an update on how we protect our migrant and seasonal workers in the housing camps that exist for many of those farms. This one replaced an earlier executive order that expired yesterday. She decided yesterday to extend that executive order through the end of November. So that's sort of the way this has gone. We also have some others that have come along the way that have sort of helped with some of the emerging challenges that we've had. For example, the opportunity for pesticide applicators to renew their licenses was significantly disrupted when we had closures with state offices. So there was an executive order that would allow for extending existing licenses until we get beyond the pandemic. So some of those have been very helpful. We've had extensions in unemployment eligibility and cost sharing that goes along with that. And for agriculture employers, because we've been designated from the beginning as a critical industry, we've been able to, for the most part, continue to operate agricultural operations business as usual. Ernie mentioned we did have some challenges early on because that wasn't a 100% across the board designation. There were some retail operations for nursery stock that were not included in that declaration of essential. And so with conversations and clarifications and a fair amount of concern expressed by the industry and others, the governor did ultimately expand and allow those operations to open up and sell plants and sell vegetables and flowers, much like what was happening in some of the Menards or Lowe's or Home Depots that we saw. So that was an important effort that we undertook just to expressed to the governor that this is a critical industry that's very time sensitive, and we were fortunate to be able to move that forward quickly. So Matt mentioned the governor's Safe Start plan. So here we are several months into the pandemic, and I think probably the second most frequent question we get is, when is this going to be over, and when are things going to return to normal? The governor has put together a Michigan Safe Start plan. You can find it on the State of Michigan website. It is providing a lot of information on where the status is of different regions of the state based on the level of COVID-19 positive cases that they are experiencing. So in the Upper Peninsula and the northern areas of the state, they are the most advanced in terms of their progress toward a full reopening, but they're not there yet. Even though the numbers of positive cases in that area of the state are very low, they still haven't essentially achieved that status that is laid out in her plan of basically no chance that this is going to reemerge and create challenges for the healthcare system and healthcare capacity. We have had some areas of the state that have gone a little bit backwards. The Lansing and Grand Rapids area of the state is a region in and of itself. And there have been some recent outbreaks that have given the governor concern. And in conversations with her and her team, they have actually pulled back just a little bit, and they have sort of retreated to a status that's a little more cautious, a little more deliberate in terms of some of the challenges that they need to overcome in order to continue to move forward. We have, today the governor issued some guidance on how schools may be able to reopen in the fall. That's not an agriculture specific issue, but it certainly is of interest to all of our members. That has a lot of caveats in it. It has a lot of checks in it that need to be overcome. They need to be able to demonstrate that there's not going to be an additional outbreak or expansion in the number of cases that we're seeing. But it does provide an opportunity based on those results to open school. So we have seen that as well. One thing that we've seen, and we talked about sort of the federal and state and other level of government collaboration, certainly resources, now that the economy has really taken a sharp downturn, that has affected state budgets. And state budgets are critical for the agriculture industry when you think about the essential services that we need to move product. You need dairy inspections to be able to ship milk. You need plant and health inspections to move nursery and landscape stock across state lines. There are just a number of different things that agriculture depends on just to be able to conduct business. So as we see the economy take a downturn, that is going to affect the amount of money that's available for state government to function. And how that affects the Department of Agriculture is going to be a critical conversation that we have moving forward. There was some news that broke today that there is a plan together on how they're going to finish the fiscal year 2020 budget that goes until October 1st. They were facing about a $3 billion deficit in terms of revenue shortfall for this year. And that's just over the next few months. So obviously, when you look into the next year, 2020 to 2021, there is another $3.2 billion shortfall that they are anticipating in state government. And so because the state has to balance its budget and our rainy day fund is limited, there are going to be some hard conversations that are coming. And obviously agriculture has a definite need for those core programs to be fully functional. We need those, not just programs, but we need the inspectors to help us fulfill those obligations. So we're going to be very mindful of that, and but there are going to be some tough decisions that are coming, you can be sure. So,
Rob,
yeah.
Rob, before we continue, we got a question on that point, and I think it's a good pause point to talk about. So as you mentioned, there's a projected $3 billion shortfall this year, an additional $4 billion shortfall next year. The last time we saw numbers like that was the recessions in the mid 2000s. And with that scenario, we had multiple years of economists projecting that we were going to go into a recession. So we had a planning horizon that we could work on as a state and make those tough decisions. When we look at things, you mentioned inspections, we've got programs for research like Project Green and our animal initiatives that we've supported in the past. How do we help County Farm Bureau members prepare for the budget discussions that ensue, whether it's things that are fundamental in the Department of Ag and Rural Development, even local communities through revenue sharing, school districts are probably all going to have impacts related to shortfalls in revenues. What can County Farm Bureau members do to prepare for that discussion and advocate for agriculture's interests?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the number one issue is to sort of take inventory of what are the critical things that we need. We talk about research, we talk about inspections, we talk about the things that we look to our land grant for, we talk about the things that we look for the Department of Agriculture for. But I think we have to have a very hard conversation about what are the things that are critical. There are some things that are nice. There are some things we would love to see continue. But I think a realistic perspective on what are the things we absolutely can't live without in the near term is really it's the priority conversation that we're going to have. And we're going to have it whether we like it or not. So I think some of those things are easy. Again, I go back to some of the examples that I laid out, inspections. Those are easy because without it, we can't do business. We can't move and help support the economy. So those are easy. But there are some that are going to be a little more difficult. And, what is the critical research that we need to have done? And some of it is critical. And we need to be able to demonstrate what those needs are and then communicate those needs to our legislative leaders because they're going to be the ones who are going to be ultimately making these decisions. So I think the benefit that we have organizationally is that we seem to be very well wired to making those communications with our legislators. Our county farm bureaus are very robust in their dialogue with their elected officials. Those real life stories are going to be critical for legislators to carry the message on our behalf. And without those, you just have to think of all the different interests that are going to be focused on, maintaining whatever they can in terms of state budgetary resources that we have. So that would be my short answer is just understanding what's critical and being ready to make those communications happen.
The next question that we got that came in, thank you, Rob. This one is for Ernie, actually. What challenges are we looking at to decentralize the food processing system to lessen the risk of disruption?
Well, that's a multi-million-dollar question, Matt. I think we can all agree with that. We have developed, as I said in my comments, a just-in-time food system. And it's because our consumers have demanded that over time, and it's worked very well to meet consumers' needs. Now, we all know that not everyone purchases the exact same thing. That's why we have a wide variety of options available in this country, and it's a good thing that we do. Statistics show that 95% of our population, purchase their food items based upon cost, availability, and what they're used to buying. But then there's 5% of our population that's willing to buy at Whole Foods the entire time, or they may choose strictly to buy local or organic or some other type of production, and that's perfectly fine as well. The big picture question, though, it's going to take lots of discussion, quite frankly, and lots of open and honest dialogue. We did not get to where we are overnight, and we will not change that overnight. But we can begin to have those discussions about what is the regulatory burden that has driven us to where we are at? What are the economic consequences that have forced us to the type of system that we have had? Does it still work for everyone? Do we need to rethink and re-break down those barriers? So we need to have a collaborative discussion between the production, the processing, the retail industry, along with our governmental agencies that are required to provide oversight in terms of so that companies aren't aren't colluding, that they aren't getting too big, and that we do not have monopolistic powers being practiced within those food companies. So it's going to take a big discussion between a lot of parties, and again, it will not happen over time. We did not to get to where we are, overnight, as I said, and we will not break those barriers down if that's what our consumers choose to do overnight as well. We should be having those discussions all the time. That's why if you take a look at our policy book, whether it's at the state or federal level, we address a number of those issues. We're actually at a perfect time for our members to take another look at our policy book relative to those monopolistic powers inclusion and say, hey, how does this impact our food processing industry? And do we need some of these rules to be enforced? Or do we need to set different policy with different ideas and new concepts and bring those forward so that we can have an open and honest dialogue? As long as we always have open and honest dialogue with the facts, with the right information and the right people, we will end up with solutions that are best for the industry.
Those are great points, Ernie. And I know that beyond the government initiated challenges due to COVID-19 that has impacted the supply chain, one of the issues that we also see coming is that next wave of supply chain changes that are born from within, whether it's from distributors and retailers' decisions. One of the examples of that is the McDonald's company is talking about considering elimination of the all-day breakfast menu, which will have impact for those commodities that supply directly into those types of food production. What kind of collaboration is going to be necessary? You talked about it a little bit, but what role is that of Farm Bureau in working with some of those company level decisions to be able to have a more foreseeable outcome in the future?
Well, first of all, I hope they don't go away from the all-day breakfast menu, because I occasionally enjoy getting a sausage McMuffin with egg, at dinner time. Nothing wrong with breakfast food at dinner time, in my opinion, but it will have an impact on our. You take a look at just that sandwich alone. From the McMuffin and our wheat growers to the sausage that's on there, our pork growers, obviously dairy, cheese, and then our egg producers. In the volume of that product that is consumed. So certainly that will have an impact, in terms of the demand for just those particular items. Along with that, we should always be collaborating with, communicating with, having conversations with those food retailers. I know from the American Farm Bureau standpoint, and John can feel free to chime in here as well. American Farm Bureau and our counterparts there are in constant communication, with corporations like McDonald's about their future changes and plans and where they're going with their menu items and their business operations. We've had discussions over time about purchasing stock within those companies. Those companies are made up of stockholders, shareholders, and making sure that when they have their shareholder meetings, we in agriculture have our input there, just as well as those that maybe have different ideas in mind about where food comes from, have their input into those companies as well. So we need to be communicating with them, meeting with them, sharing our concerns, not only at the local level, but in that particular instance, more so at the national level, at their corporate levels, so that we can share our concerns about what that impact will mean to our farmers and their daily operations. Because anytime you eliminate the opportunity to purchase a product from retail, obviously it has an impact on demand, which will then have, an impact on price.
Thank you, Ernie. One of the next questions we got in from the callers relates to that same theme of collaboration, but at a different level. And I think Rob spoke to this a little bit earlier, and it relates to collaboration among units of government. So beyond the questions that you brought up, Rob, about when is the state going to reopen, the other issue seems to be the challenge of how the state of Michigan compares with other states within our region. Within the country. How are each individual municipalities or local units of government managing in addition to what we see at a state and federal level? I throw that out there. I'm not sure if Rob or John would like to jump at that one, but what are your thoughts on that? What kind of collaboration are we seeing out there? What more can be done?
Well, I would take a first shot. I think that collaboration, if you look within the state and you look between state and local units of government, I think that collaboration is evolving. I think that early on there were some challenges and sort of conflicts between state and local efforts to try to address and react to the early COVID-19 crisis. I think there was a lot that we didn't know, and so we saw local units of government, enacting ordinances on protocols for workers coming to work. Those were challenging because you had municipalities around the state doing different things, and so how to A, learn about those, B, understand those, and then C, disseminate information to the members impacted was very difficult. That seemed to have sorted itself out, and I think that we're at a better place now. But yet again today, we're having conversations right now about protecting our migrant and seasonal workers. There's certainly a role for local health departments to have in that conversation, and they have. But that's been a traditional role that they have always played. So, a farmer's interaction with a local health department in that arena is not unusual. And it seems like they are, coordinating better with some of the requirements that are being, put in place by, either through executive order or through guidance from the Department of Agriculture. But I don't think we're fully there yet. I think we're going to still see, as more and more areas of the economy open up. I think as we see the state begin to, with any luck, if the state begins to retreat from executive order sort of governance of the situation into a more traditional legislative executive collaboration, I think it's very possible that we will see local units of government, maybe re-engage a little bit, based on what exists in the local communities. So that would be my answer, is that we've sort of ridden the roller coaster of how that has worked in the state, and some good, some bad, but I don't think the book is fully written on that yet.
All right, thank you, Rob. John?
I was just saying, I know we're getting close on time here, but I just real quickly, I think this has forced us to collaborate more than we normally do across the board. And with us in Farm Bureau, we've been spending more time talking to our counterparts in other states and having weekly calls with our state Farm Bureau presidents just to hear what's going on in those different situations. And it's obviously been very different from state to state how this has unfolded and how the states have reacted. And by having that ability for the states to do that, knowing the people on the ground firsthand, is definitely very different than if this had been a top-down approach just from the federal government perspective. So I think we're going to be talking about this for a long time, and both from a policy perspective and from a history perspective. And I think we'll be able to, at some point, have a book about what we should have done or could have done better, but, it's hindsight. So I think we're all trying to manage through in our unique instances and our unique situations by state.
Thanks, John. Well, we want to thank our guests for joining us tonight, and all of those of you that are watching. Thank you for joining us for this edition of our Hitching Post videocast. We want to remind you that the links will be shared this Thursday on our Facebook page. So topics that were discussed, you want to share those with others, please feel free to do that and provide them with those links on our Facebook page or our YouTube channel. While you're on the Facebook page, go to our events section and you can sign up for the July Hitching Post with Laura Campbell, the manager of our Agricultural Ecology Department, and Theresa Sissong, our Field Crops and Advisory Team Specialist, as they discuss climate and weather with Rita Hereford, a Farm Bureau member from Huron County. There's a quick survey that will be provided after this videocast concludes, and we hope that everyone takes a minute to fill that out. That does help us as we prepare future editions of this opportunity. It's a great place to add any additional questions that you may not have gotten the opportunity to ask tonight and request information, or just help us to connect you with the County Farm Bureau office. Again, thank you for joining us.